want to talk about Donald Trump allowing all of these white Afrikaners over here into the U.S., claiming that they being racially targeted, discriminated against, so on and so forth, and that they refugees, which couldn't be further from the truth. See, the thing is, whites and non-black people own and control the bulk of, Africa's resources, and you know how fast, white powers, world power to be over there in Africa, if, black South continental Africans, the real, Africans, we talking about the black melanated, continental Africans were over there, racially targeted and discriminating and, persecuting, these white farmers that they put it, white power, the white power, global power structure will be over there, and so fast of a time it'll make your head spin, truth be told. So they ain't being, racially, targeted and discriminated against. They don't, and they for sure as hell ain't no refugees, because they ain't leaving no war torn countries. You know what I mean? Because I much rather see, the melanated, black continental Africans whose land it really is, over there in Africa, push out all of these invaders, such as, the white people and even the Asians, because they the ones riding high on the hog, and profiting off of all the natural resources that Africa got, while black people are living on the bottom. And I don't rock with that, nor do I co-sign or endorse it, But Trump allowing all of these white, South Afrikaners, as they put it, which is wrong by definition, because the only real true, Africans is, the melanated black continental Africans. So that's wrong by definition. But him allowing all of these white Afrikaners over here into the U.S. was to say, I'm white, not say so, because he had, where he was trying to get out all of the mass immigration. But I guess that only applied to, melanated immigrants, So we ain't gonna have two systems in place, because I'm not for, mass immigration here to the U.S., for the most part, no way. But, if we ain't gonna have melanated immigrants come in, the same got to be applied and carry, fair and equally all the way throughout the board. So, white ones shouldn't be able to gain access to the U.S. like that. So I got the audio and the video of, Trump blatantly practicing, open air white supremacy and displaying his anti-black views on things. And we're going to walk through and talk about it how we normally do, family. Fair use.
In the meantime, the Trump administration welcomed a group of 59 white South Africans as refugees, prompting some serious blowback from immigration advocates. Fox News Chief Washington correspondent Mike Emanuel.
And them bringing these, so-called white Afrikaners over here, they're going to be giving them resources and aid, and that could be going to our foundational Black American, reparations claim. So, they got the resources, to, allocate cash reparations to descendants of freedmen. They just give it to all these other groups, which is a bunch of nonsense. But let's continue.
Has more from D.C.
Let me see the order or something. As President Trump's immigration crackdown continues,
welcome to the United States of America.
The administration rolled out the red carpet for 59 white South Africans they call refugees, saying they faced racial discrimination back home.
We're sending a clear message that the United States really rejects the egregious persecution of people on the basis of race in South Africa.
These people aren't being racially discriminated or targeted or persecuted based off of race. You know what I mean? If the black continental Africans, were doing this, how fast white world power to be over there waging war on, the melanated, black people over there in South Africa, that happens so fast it'll make your head spin. This is, a false claim, a bogus narrative that Trump is putting out here to, openly, bring in white people while excluding melanated ones. But let's continue.
President Trump claims the U.S. had to take in the group because white farmers are being killed in South Africa in what the president calls a genocide.
White farmers ain't being genocided in South Africa. They riding high on the hog, whites and Asians, because what they do is they exploit, the black, people whose land that really is the continental, black Africans. They exploit, all the natural resources from their land, and while the, the black melanated people, they live at the bottom, while the whites and the Asians ride high on the hog. And I don't, co-sign, nor do I rock with that whole narrative. But let's continue.
But there's no evidence that's taking place, and some civil rights advocates are now raising questions.
No evidence because that ain't taking place, Black people, would if they were, them black South Africans were over there, persecuting, white farmers and all of this nonsense, which they claiming and alleging, how fast, white world power to be over there waging war on these black folks, it'll happen so fast it'll make your head spin.
About the decision to admit only white refugees at a time when the administration has cut off access to others facing war.
What this is about is, Trump practicing double standards, allowing, white immigrants in, while excluding melanated ones. And I don't rock with that. I ain't for, mass immigration, period. But if, one thing is going to, be applied to one group, it got to be fair, and just and balanced and applied to the other group. So if melanated immigrants, ain't allowed into the U.S., the same got to apply for, white immigrants, but let's continue.
And famine.
Flying white Afrikaners over here to the United States to find refuge where they deny refuge for everybody else from war-torn communities at that. I mean, this is very clear to us.
The White House says this group was strictly vetted and it's just the first of many that will be relocated to the U.S. But it's not.
And did you catch that? The first of many. So they planning on rolling the red carpet out for, white immigrants, they going to plan on probably making this normal protocol, which is a bunch of nonsense. If the same is going to be applied for melanated immigrants, them not being able to come into the U.S., the same got to be applied to white ones. Because like I said, I ain't for, mass immigration, period, from, melanated people or white ones. I'm just for, equality and balance, you know what I mean, and fairness, because we as foundational Black Americans, we don't benefit from mass immigration no way. If anything, it takes resources that could be going to foundational Black Americans, such as us getting our reparations, so the money that they could be allocating to foundational Black Americans reparations claim, they giving it out to all of these, immigrant groups such as these, white Afrikaners coming over here, which is a bunch of nonsense. But let's continue.
Clear how many will want to come because white South Africans still retain most of the country's privately held wealth.
The vast majority of South Africans.
That's what I'm saying. White South Africans and these Asians, they ride high on the hog over there in Africa, and they got that way from misusing and abusing, the real, Black continental Africans, and robbing them of all their resources, which is a bunch of nonsense.
Africans are Black people, and the vast majority of South Africans have no rights to land, none.
They said the vast majority of South Africans is Black people, and they ain't got no rights to land, but on the other hand, whites and Asians is riding high on the hog. But in closing, Donald Trump doing this move right here is, furthermore proof of his, white supremacist ways and him displaying his anti-Black views on things. If one thing is going to be applied to melanated immigrants, the same, got to be applied to white ones, because I ain't for mass immigration, but, we got to keep this thing fair and equal. So if it don't apply to melanated immigrants, it shouldn't apply to white ones. Just my thoughts on the matter. Peace.